This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. Embarrassing, humiliating, and a f***ing disgrace. Hello and welcome to the Equals to Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be trying to look over the horror show against Bristol City by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you an exclusive interview with Roy Hodgson after the game. So let's begin. Palace's miserable record at Ashton Gate continued as Bristol City cruised into the quarter-finals of the Carabao Cup with a convincing victory against the Eagles. Having not beaten City on their own patch in 11 previous attempts stretching back to 1980, things looked to be going smoothly when Bakary Sako opened the scoring after 21 minutes, but strikes from Matty Taylor and Milan Djuric put the hosts ahead before half-time, before a wonder goal by Bryan was quickly followed up by a long-range effort by Callum O'Dowda in the second half to end the Eagles' interest in the competition. Despite having made 10 changes, the opening half an hour belonged to Roy Hodgson's team, and just 6 minutes in the host goal frame was shaking. A flow move began when Ruben Loftus-Cheek pushed forward from inside his own half and fed in Sako, whose powerful cross fell perfectly for Chung Lee, but his vicious volley thudded against the crossbar. Sako then tested Luke Steele with a scuffed shot from range, and then the positive start continued when Sully Kaikai went close when he was picked out inside the area, but saw his shot beaten away by the goalkeeper. The Robins delivered a warning shot of their own 20 minutes in when Adeline Flint poked goalwards after the ball fell unexpectedly for him, but it came straight to Wayne Hennessy. And seconds after that little scare, Palace found the opening goal that their early dominance deserved. Once again Loftus-Cheek was instrumental in the move, gaining possession and starting an attack before releasing Sako, and after taking a touch the Malian drove the ball under Steele to spark celebrations in front of the travelling 2,000 Eagles fans. The virtual one-way traffic continued when Kaikai forced Steele to make another awkward-looking save, but having beaten Premier League opposition in both Watford and Stoke City in previous rounds, City were no pushovers and they proved that again on 34 minutes by pulling level. A long ball came towards Patrick, who airshotted a clearance before trying to tidy up by heading back to Hennessy. However, his attempted back pass was too tame and Taylor managed to nip in control of his chest and fire the falling ball beyond Hennessy to equalise. And then 5 minutes later the game was turned on its head when Lee Johnson's side got in front. After Hordu Morgensen delivered a long throw into the area, the ball dropped amongst a crowd of players and failed to be cleared, allowing Djuric, who had only come on for the injury victim Farmer Donald 8 minutes earlier, to blast past Hennessy. A fine stop by Steele prevented Sako from doubling his tally and sending the sides in level at the break. And after recovering from a shaky start, the City custodian showed his quality once again after the restart, when he displayed brilliant reactions to stop Loftus-Cheek from netting his first Palace goal via a flick from a Sako cross. Those saves proved pivotal as it laid the foundations for his team to quickly move out of sight, as on the hour mark Palace's cup hopes were left hanging by a thread. There looked to be little on when Bryan received the ball in the corner of the area, but he unleashed a bullet of a shot that flushed over Hennessy and clipped the top of the crossbar before flying into the net. And those hopes were ended just 6 minutes later when a free kick was pumped into the box from the halfway line, which Palace could only clear to O'Dowda, who flicked the ball up before rifling it into the bottom corner of the net to add to the Eagles' misery. That goal virtually ended the game as a contest and the remainder passed by with virtually any incident, although Jason Puncher went close to ending his goal drought with a few minutes remaining, but again Steele was equal to it, and the stopper also got down low to deny Freddie Ladapo a first goal in Palace colours as a disappointing evening for Roy Hodgson's team came to its conclusion. Now for some match statistics. Total shots, 6 to Palace's 14. Shots on target, 5 to Palace's 9. Possession, 46% Bristol City, 54% Crystal Palace. Corners, 0 to Palace's 6, and fouls, 7 to Palace's 18. So now I'm going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at @equals2palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place for you to join in with discussions and share your opinions with other fans. And also, it is a great place for you to upload links to articles and also photos and videos from the game, so that other fans can see the game from your perspective. So if you do like hearing what others have to say and sharing your own opinion, then the Facebook group is a great place to go. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, rating the players from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best and 1 being the worst. And you don't necessarily have to do that. You can also just comment with your views on the game, and this is so that other people who come to this video, who listen to the podcast, not only listen to my opinion, but can read the comments and hear what other fans thought of the game. And also, if I go back to the video, I can also see what fans said about the game and how that compares to my opinion of the game. But in terms of the player ratings for this game in particular, which was quite a horrifying display, I'm not really expecting any people to have quite high opinions of the game and for any player to get more than, say, a 4 in the player ratings. But if you do want to find any of these social media groups and pages, then all links will be in the description below. But just before I go on to talk about the player ratings, I'm just going to give you a small sort of summary of the game. And the 3 words I used to describe the game were embarrassing, humiliating and a disgrace. Now, just to talk through why I picked these words, embarrassing is that although it was our second team and you would expect a lower performance, it's quite embarrassing that a Premier League team, not necessarily Premier League quality players, but a Premier League team gets knocked out or gets thrashed by a Championship team. That's not to take anything away from Bristol City, because they were fantastic in this game. But in terms of our performance, it's quite embarrassing that a Premier League team gets bossed like that from a Championship team. It's quite humiliating the fact that we're meant to be a better team. Even though we're on a bad run of form, you would expect us to win this game. We didn't, and it's a disgrace purely because even though the team's weak, you'd still expect us to go out there, and even if we did lose the game, you wouldn't expect us to lose this game in that sort of manners, in the fact that we got completely run over the park. But to be honest, there's no disguising or sugarcoating this result. It was truly appalling. There's nothing more I can say. You know, I could go on for hours talking about how disappointed, how embarrassing this result was, but I'm not going to talk about it too much. It was really appalling, and even though it is a venue where we rarely have any success, so we never really beat Bristol City there, that's no excuse for putting in such a terrible performance. Now, of course, Roy Hodgson, you'll hear the interview later on in the podcast, but he said in his interview he made 10 changes. He wanted to give the fringe players a go, and he said, I will take full responsibility for this result because I gave these players a chance. They didn't do it. I picked them, so it's my fault. But when you think about it, is these fringe players, the reason they're not in the team is because they're not good enough, or they're not showing the manager what to do. So this game was a chance for them to go out there and show what they could do. And based on this performance, no player at all showed why they should be in the team. Maybe you could excuse Sako because he scored the goal. But in terms of the whole team, Roy Hodgson, he obviously made a big decision, actually making 10 changes, giving the fringe players a go. But it completely backfired because the fringe players, A, gave a really bad performance, but B, didn't actually show him why they should be anywhere near the first team. So this just shows that, you know, that actually we can't really change our first team because our first 11 is the strongest team we've got. But to be honest, like I said, it's really disappointing. Do comment below with what you think. But personally, the fringe players, even though it was a weaker side, you'll still expect us to win this game. And even though you've got the likes of Freddie Ladapo, Jason Punchin, Martin Kelly, and even though you've got players like this in the side who are not necessarily the best quality players, you'll still expect them to still do well against lower league opposition. But hey ho, the fringe players didn't take their chance, and our second 11, which is weaker than our first 11, got beaten really well. But to be honest, don't take anything away from Bristol City. They fully deserved the win. You know, the players that they were selected, they were physical, they had height, they used their commitment, they used their, I don't even know how to describe it, but they had drive, they had determination to try and get a result against the Premier League side. And when you consider they've beaten Watford and West Brom, I believe it is, you know, they're quite thrilled and they're quite up for it because they've beaten Premier League teams before. But Palace, in terms of our performance, you know, Bristol City played really well. We failed to make an impression. So although we did dominate the game, we didn't take our chances and we collapsed defensively and made stupid errors. And it just highlights this game, the lack of squad depth. So I've already talked about it already with in terms of the squad being full of fringe players. but there is a lack of squad depth, so the fact that our second 11 can't at least put up a fight against a championship team shows how bad it is. But let's just hope really that this defeat does sort of show us a corner. So it shows us what happened last season. So we got thrashed by Sunderland 4-0. That got a reaction from the players and from the fans, got behind the team, and they started again. So now we've hit rock bottom by getting beaten 4-1 by a championship side. Hopefully that can help us to turn the corner now. And when you consider the game at the weekend, we played quite well against Newcastle. We've got West Ham coming up. If we play the first team against West Ham, which is significantly better than the team here, then I don't see why we couldn't at least get a draw against West Ham, because on this game here showing how bad our second team is. But you can't base this weekend's game based on this result, purely because it's a completely different squad. So there'll be a completely different 11 players who have played really well against Newcastle, other teams in the Premier League. So you can't really base this result on the results coming up this weekend, purely because the team will be so different. But to be honest, after such an embarrassing result, and I normally do this with cup games anyway, I'm not going to give you full player ratings, but instead of that, I'm just going to give you a small summary of each of the players, giving you their rating, a small sentence about their performance. And this is purely because A, I don't want to talk about the game, and B, you know, I don't normally talk about cup games anyway in too much detail, purely because they're cup games, not really as important as the league. But now I'm going to move on to the player rating, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I am going to give a 5. Had little to do in the opening half prior to the 2 goals. He couldn't have done much about the goals and was let down by those players in front of him. Right back Timothy Fosu-Mensah, who I am going to give a 4. Few misplaced passes early on and was rash with a couple of clearances. Centre back Martin Kelly, who I am going to give a 4. Hasn't had many opportunities so far this season, but failed to impress. Centre back James Tompkins, who I am going to give a 5. Didn't do too much wrong on a personal level, but was part of a defence that collectively struggled under pressure. Left back Patrick Vellano, who I am going to give a 3. What was he doing for Bristol City's first goal? His calamitous error in heading the ball back to Matty Taylor gifted Bristol City the equaliser in a game that Palace had largely controlled up until that point. He failed to impress going forward, as well as in a poor showing before being substituted. Midfield Jason Punchin, who I am going to give a 4. Very quiet, was neat and tidy in midfield but lacked an incisive pass going forward. Midfield Jara Riedwald, who I am going to give a 4. Tried to break up play and get involved in midfield but didn't stand out. Left wing Sully Kaikai, who I am going to give a 5. Tried hard on the wing in the first half and looked a threat with a couple of good crosses. He almost caught out Luke Steele in the Bristol City goal with a stinging shot that moved in the air but was taken off in the second half. Attacking midfielder Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who I am going to give a 5. Looked a threat going forward in the first half and provided the assist for Sako's goal with a fine defence-splitting pass. Did not cover himself in glory at the other end, as Milan Djuric gave Bristol City the lead and faded in the second half. Right wing Lee Chung-Young, who I am going to give a 4. Almost scored a superb goal when he hit the bar with a volley early on. For the most part it was neat and tidy in midfield and tried to get forward in support of Sako, but went off with an injury in the second half. Striker Bakary Sako, who I am going to give a 6. Looked lively up front and gave Palace the lead with a neat finish. Offered a threat going forward with both shots and crosses from wide areas, but his influence wandered as the game went away from Palace. Now for the subs, Freli Ladapo, a 4, who came on for Lee. Tried to make things happen, but failed to provide a real goal threat. Papa Soare, who came on for Sully Kaikai, a 4. Continued his recovery with more minutes in the first team, but didn't really have much impact on the game. And Levi Lekema, who I'm also going to give a 4, who came on for Vellano. Given another opportunity from the bench, but barely touched the ball. Now this is the part of the podcast where I'd normally move on to the man of the match. But if you thought at the beginning when I introduced the podcast and said I would go on to talk about the man of the match, if you thought I was actually serious about giving out this award, then you were clearly wrong, because after such an embarrassing display, no one actually deserves any credit for a performance, but no credit whatsoever from the game. And although I picked out Bakary Sako who actually scored the goal and actually showed a bit of effort in the game, I can't even give anything for his performance, because as a whole it was a really disappointing, embarrassing performance from the whole team. But if anyone does deserve the award, then it's got to go to the 2,000 Palace fans that went up to Bristol to watch that horror show of a game. So well done to them. They actually had to sit through that game and go through the pain of watching our team, a Premier League team, get beaten by a Championship team. But credit to them, and then, to be honest, credit to them fans, but the one fan who threw the shirt back at Papa's soiree, I exclude you from that, because what you done to Papa after what he's been through, although we're all frustrated, there's no reason for you to throw your shirt back at Papa's soiree, because all he was trying to do was thank the fans for being there for the support. So the award this week, the man of the match, is actually going to go to the Palace fans, but that is excluding the Palace fan who decided to throw the shirt back at Papa's soiree. But that's it from me. Now you've heard my match report, player ratings, and my sort of man of the match award. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got an exclusive interview with Roy Hodgson following the game.
Well, I'm sure you're very disappointed this evening. Can we get your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I'm disappointed that a team that I put out that contained a lot of players I haven't seen an awful lot of, but of course were bought in by the club to be first team players, lost a game so heavily against an opponent that I thought, especially in the first half, we had the measure of. So the result's disappointing, that's for sure, but to some extent I must take the responsibility for that, because if the result had been the be-all and end-all, then the team that played against Chelsea and Newcastle would have played here as well. But I really wanted to see some players who haven't had much of a look in this year, because the team over the last 2 or 3 games has been pretty much the same 11. So my biggest disappointment is that there weren't enough players playing in the game tonight who have given me that headache, who've shown me that, you know, we were signed by the club, some of them for quite big money, to be a player who's, you know, going to make your first team, and certainly put a lot of pressure on some of the other players who were there. And I didn't see much of that this evening, unfortunately, and that's my biggest disappointment. And I'm disappointed for the fans as well. You know, it's a fantastic travelling support again. One always feels a bit guilty as a manager and coach when you do prioritise the Premier League, and you do, if you like, play a so-called weaker team in this competition, and so many then come to watch you play. That's a responsibility that I take upon my shoulders, but I feel very disappointed for them that they've come all this way and seen us lose so heavily in a game which I don't think we should have lost heavily.
Yeah, you mentioned the fans. We've got West Ham on Saturday. Obviously it'll be a very different lineup, but how important are the fans going to be?
Well, they're always important. I mean, that's the thing, and you know, let's hope that tonight's performance and seeing some of these players who they maybe haven't seen so much of, like myself tonight, hasn't disappointed them too much, so that they take that out on us, if you like, on a Saturday. Unfortunately, when you make these decisions, I don't think at the moment, with the first team, with the first 11 that we've got, which I think is the best 11 we can put out at the moment, but is obviously fragile because, you know, we don't have such a number of players backing up that are really putting them under pressure, and that we saw tonight. And that's the major disappointment. I was rather hoping tonight I would see that. I'd see some players that really threaten the first team. But that hasn't happened, so it was a good night for the 10 or 11 players that were left back at the training ground, and a bad night for me as the manager and coach of the team, a bad night for the fans, to whom I apologise for the team's performance, and of course also a bad night for a few of these players who obviously think that they should be in the team, but they didn't do enough tonight to prove it to me.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Bristol City. But make sure to come on next week for a post-match review for the game against West Ham. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.